The auctioneer was already calling numbers when Muhammad Ali pulled into the dirt parking area next to the white farmhouse. He had not planned to stop. He had not known this was happening, and he had no reason to be here. He had been driving through rural Oklahoma on a Wednesday morning in late October, 1974, 3 days after returning from Kinshasa, Zaire, where he had just reclaimed the heavyweight championship of the world from George Foreman in a fight that the entire world said he would lose. And he was heading toward Tulsa for a scheduled appearance at a civic event that was paying him enough to justify the drive. He had been on the county road for an hour, passing farmland and fence lines and the occasional cluster of buildings that Oklahoma calls a town, when he saw the vehicles gathered around the white farmhouse and the old red barn and the fields rolling away from the road in the flat, specific way of Oklahoma land that has been worked by the same hands for decades. He did not know yet what he was seeing. He pulled over. He parked behind a row of pickup trucks and got out of his car and stood at the edge of the crowd that had gathered in the yard, and he listened. It took him less than 2 minutes to understand. A farm auction was what it was. But not every farm auction was the same kind of event. There was the kind where a farmer who had worked a lifetime wanted to retire and sell the equipment and the land and move closer to his grandchildren, or simply stop getting up at 4 a.m. because his body had earned the rest. That kind of auction had a different quality, a different air, something elegiac but not wrong. The other kind was what this was, the kind where the bank had made calculations and the calculations had come out against the farmer, where the debt exceeded what the farmer could currently pay, where the legal machinery of foreclosure had been set in motion and authorized by a court, and now a professional auctioneer from the city stood on the porch of a farmhouse with a microphone and a clipboard calling numbers into the cold morning air, while the man who had built the place stood somewhere in the crowd and watched the arithmetic of his life being resolved against him. The man who had built this place was Harold Jennings. He was 71 years old, and he had been farming this land since he was 19 years old. More than 50 years. His father had brought the family to this part of Oklahoma in the 1922 during the period when land was cheap and the opportunity was real if you were willing to work harder than most people were willing to work. Harold had grown up watching his father farm this land, had taken it over in the 1950s when his father's hands gave out, had expanded it slowly and carefully over 2 decades by buying adjacent parcels when they came available and when the money allowed. He had married Margaret in 1953, and she had worked alongside him for 20 years before her health made fieldwork impossible, and she moved to the kitchen and the garden and the management of the household and the raising of their 2 children with the same competence she brought to everything she did. Margaret had died in April, 6 months before this Wednesday morning. She had been sick for 3 years. The final year had required medical care that cost more than the farm's income could absorb. The drought that hit this part of Oklahoma in 1972 and 1973 had already put Harold behind on his loan payments to First National Bank of Bristow. The medical bills had put him further behind. His son, Robert, had driven from Tulsa twice to meet with the bank's vice president and ask about a modified payment schedule that would let Harold catch up over time. The bank had declined both times. The bank's position was that the loan was in default and the foreclosure would proceed. Ali found a man at the edge of the crowd and asked quietly what was happening. The man looked at him with the standard double take of recognition, followed immediately by the overriding gravity of the present situation, which was too immediate and too painful to be interrupted for long, even by Muhammad Ali. He told Ali everything he had just described: the drought, Margaret's illness, the bank's refusal. The man in the gray suit near the front, who was bidding on Harold's tractor, was Richard Colson, vice president of First National Bank of Bristow. The tractor was a 1961 John Deere that Harold had maintained himself for 13 years. Ali looked at the man in the gray suit, looked at the auctioneer, looked around the crowd for Harold Jennings, found him at the back, near the fence that separated the yard from the near field. 71 years old, work-worn hands, a posture that was holding itself upright through what appeared to be tremendous deliberate effort. A man watching his life being distributed to the lowest bidders by a system that had decided his debt was more important than his decades. Ali walked to where Harold Jennings was standing. Harold did not notice him approach. He was watching the tractor bidding. Ali stood beside him for a moment without speaking. Then Harold looked over. The recognition arrived slowly, the way recognition arrives when your mind is elsewhere and reality has to knock twice to get in. He looked at Ali with the expression of a man who has decided that the world is sufficiently strange this morning that Muhammad Ali standing next to him at his own farm auction was simply one more data point. Ali said he was sorry. They stood together, watching the tractor go to Richard Colson for $1,100. Then the auctioneer moved to the harvesting equipment, then to the stored grain, then to the smaller tools and the vehicles. Each item called, each item taken. Between items, Ali asked Harold questions. Not intrusive questions, the questions of someone who wanted to understand the shape of what had happened. How long had the farm been in his family? When had the debt gotten ahead of him? What had the bank said when Harold's son had tried to arrange payments? Harold answered in the flat, factual way of someone who has processed grief past the point where it requires expression and arrived at something more like weather. The facts were what they were. The drought was what it was. Margaret's illness was what it had cost. The bank was what the bank had decided to be. The auctioneer reached the farmhouse. 140 acres of Oklahoma farmland that Harold Jennings had farmed for 52 years. The starting bid was called. Richard Colson opened the bidding. Ali raised his hand. The auctioneer, who had registered Ali's presence in the crowd with the professional alertness of someone who is paid to know who is bidding, acknowledged the bid, called for more. Colson bid again. Ali bid again. Two men standing in a field in Oklahoma, one in a gray suit representing a bank, one in a jacket that had driven across the world to get to this field, bidding on 140 acres of farmland that one of them had never set foot on before this morning. Colson looked at Ali directly. He was a man who made calculations for a living, and he was making one now. The bank wanted the land. The land was worth what it was worth. There was a number above which the land was not worth buying at auction for the bank's purposes. He bid again. The crowd had gone quiet, in the specific way that crowds go quiet when something is happening that nobody planned for and nobody knows how to categorize. 14 people who had come to this farm auction out of necessity or obligation or the sad solidarity of neighbors standing witness were standing still in the October air, watching Muhammad Ali bid on Harold Jennings's farm. Colson looked at Ali for a long moment. Then he looked at the auctioneer. He said something to the man beside him in a low voice. Then he bid again, a number that was above where the bank had set its ceiling. A number that said this had become about something other than the bank's financial calculations. Ali bid above him. Colson bid again. His jaw was set. He was not a man accustomed to being outbid on anything he had decided to acquire. He was the vice president of a bank in a small Oklahoma city, and he had the authority of institutions behind him, and the assumption, which had been accurate in every previous similar situation, that no individual bidder at a distressed farm auction had both the resources and the motivation to exceed what the bank would pay. He had not previously been at an auction where Muhammad Ali drove past on a county road and turned in. Ali bid above him again, and then he said something to the auctioneer, said it clearly enough that the people standing closest to the front could hear it. He said he would like to pay off the outstanding debt on this property in full instead of continuing the bidding, and he asked the auctioneer if that was a mechanism available to him under the terms of the proceeding. The auctioneer stopped. This was outside the standard procedure. He said he would need to consult with the bank's representative. He walked to where Coulson was standing. They had a conversation that lasted approximately 3 minutes. The crowd did not make any sound for those 3 minutes, except for 2 children near the fence who were shushed by their parents. Harold Jennings stood at the back of the crowd next to the man who had just offered to pay his debt and said nothing at all. The auctioneer returned. He said the bank would accept payoff of the outstanding balance in lieu of the auction proceeding, provided payment could be confirmed within 48 hours. The outstanding balance on Harold Jennings' farm loan, including penalties and legal fees, was $31,400. Ali said he would arrange it. The crowd made a sound then, not applause exactly, something that came from a different place than applause. The sound of people who have been watching something terrible and have seen it stop. Richard Coulson gathered his papers and walked to his car without speaking to anyone. He drove out of the dirt parking area and onto the county road and did not look back. He had come to take a farm and he was leaving without it. And he had the particular expression of a man who has lost something he considered already his. Harold Jennings turned slowly to look at the man standing beside him. He was 71 years old, and he had been holding himself upright through the entire morning, through what appeared to be tremendous, deliberate effort. The effort of a man who has decided that whatever happens, he will not collapse in front of his neighbors on his own land. The effort was still visible in his face and his posture, but something underneath it had shifted in the last 60 seconds in a way that Harold was still processing. He said he could not accept this, said it was too much, said he did not know how he would ever repay it, and he was not a man who accepted what he could not repay. Ali said he did not need to be repaid, said it simply and without ceremony. The way you say something that is true and requires no decoration. He said Harold had worked this land for 52 years, and that kind of work had a value that didn't appear on a bank's ledger, and shouldn't have to. Said he had just come back from the other side of the world where he had done his own work, and he had some money, and a farm that had belonged to the same man for 52 years seemed like a better use of it than most things he could think of. Harold said why? Not argumentatively, genuinely. Why him? Why stop on a county road in rural Oklahoma for a stranger's auction? Ali looked at the farmhouse, at the barn, at the fields running away to the flat horizon, the way Oklahoma fields do, like the land itself is trying to reach something just out of sight. He said he had driven past his share of things in the years when he had no money, and he had driven past his share of things in the years when he had money, but was somewhere else in his head. And he had decided some time ago that if he ever had the money and the moment together in the same place at the same time, he would stop. This was the moment. He had the money. He said it was not a complicated decision from where he was standing. The crowd around them had dispersed slowly, in the way that crowds disperse when the event they came for has ended differently than expected. Some of them shook Harold's hand before they left. Several of them looked at Ali with the expression of people who have witnessed something they will describe for the rest of their lives, and are already trying to find the right words for it. The paperwork was arranged over the following 2 days. The loan was paid in full through Ali's attorney, who made the necessary calls to First National Bank of Bristow. The foreclosure was reversed. The farm was Harold Jennings's, as it had been Harold Jennings's since 1922, when Harold's father had filed the original deed. Harold's son Robert drove 4 hours from Tulsa when he heard what had happened. He had been at work at a construction firm when his wife called him with what she had heard from someone who had been at the auction. He drove straight to the farm without stopping. He stood in the yard where the auction had taken place that morning and listened to his father tell the whole story, and when Harold was finished, Robert sat down on the porch steps and was quiet for a long time. He tried to reach Ali's people twice to arrange some form of formal acknowledgement, some occasion where the Jennings family could express what had occurred in terms that matched its scale. Ali's people passed along the message, and Ali's response was that a phone call to Harold would be enough, that no ceremony was necessary, and none was wanted. He called on Thursday evening, the day after the paperwork was finalized and the loan was paid, and First National Bank of Bristow had confirmed in writing that the foreclosure was reversed and the property was Harold Jennings's outright. Harold answered on the second ring. They talked for 23 minutes. Harold's son Robert sat across the kitchen table and listened to his father's side of the conversation with the attention of someone who understands he is witnessing something that will matter for the rest of the family's life. Harold told Ali that his wife Margaret had never stopped believing the farm would stay in the family. Said she had believed it in the drought years, when the math stopped working and the bank letters started arriving. Said she had believed it in the hospital in the final months, when she was very sick and Harold was sitting beside her, trying not to let her see how frightened he was. She had told Harold that the land would be there when everything else had passed, that some things were meant to stay. Ali was quiet for a moment after Harold said that. Then he said Margaret sounded like a woman who knew things about how the world worked, that most people spent their whole lives learning and still didn't fully get. Harold laughed, said that was about right, said she had known most things worth knowing and had known them earlier than most people and with more certainty. Ali said he was glad the farm was staying where it belonged, said he was glad he had turned off the road. Harold said he would be grateful for the rest of his life, said he wanted Ali to know that, said some things were too large for the usual words, but he wanted the fact of the gratitude to be clearly stated regardless. Ali said, "Enjoy your farm, Harold," and he said goodbye. Harold Jennings farmed his 140 acres for 8 more years. His health declined in 1982, and he handed management to Robert, who drove from Tulsa on weekends and eventually moved his family to the farm permanently in 1984. The land remained in the Jennings family. The deed that Harold's father had filed in 1922 continued to carry the family name. The red barn was repainted in 1978, and the white farmhouse was given a new roof in 1980, and the John Deere tractor that Richard Coulson had bid on in October 1974 ran until 1987, when it was finally retired and kept in the barn because Robert could not bring himself to sell it. Robert Jennings told the story to his own children and to his grandchildren. He told it the way his father had told it to him, accurately and without inflation. The man who had just won back the heavyweight championship of the world, the county road, the crowd around the farmhouse, the turning in, the bidding, the $31,400, the phone call on Thursday, the 23 minutes. He told them what his father had said about why Ali stopped. That Ali had said it was not complicated, that the moment and the money were in the same place at the same time, and so he stopped. Robert told his children that the lesson of the story was not about money, that most people did not have the resources Muhammad Ali had in October 1974, and could not do what Ali did in the specific way Ali did it. The lesson was about the stopping, about recognizing something that required a response and responding to it, about not driving past. If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold stories about Muhammad Ali and the choices he made when no camera was watching and no crowd was cheering, and the only witness was a field of Oklahoma farmland and 14 strangers who needed to see someone stop. Share this with someone who needs to believe that some people still turn off the road when they see something that requires turning off the road. Leave a comment about a moment when you chose to stop instead of continuing past. And remember, Muhammad Ali won back the heavyweight championship of the world in Kinshasa. 3 days later, he was driving through Oklahoma, and he saw a crowd around a farmhouse, and he turned off the road. He did not plan it. He did not announce it. He did not tell anyone about it afterward. He just turned off the road, and he stopped, and he did what the moment asked him to do. That was the whole of it. That was enough. Some people are simply built that way. Some people, when they see the thing that needs doing, do it without calculating what it costs them first. Muhammad Ali was one of those people. He had always been one of those people. That is what made him truly great.